and welcome to the Astranti pre-scene video analysis series for the August 2018 case study exam on Media Group FNG. This is the strategic analysis video, the penultimate video in our series, where we're going to look at some of the key models used in the CIMA syllabus and how they apply to the case. So very quick introduction. It's the newspaper industry, both the print industry and the digital news industry, which is the focus. And of course, it's something that I'm sure you are all familiar with in terms of the end product. You've all used news apps, you've all read newspapers before, but perhaps you haven't actually looked behind the scenes to how the industry works, how the industry makes its money before. And so it's quite a useful and quite an interesting industry for us to look at. And what we know from a very quick overview is that the Finch News Group is a private organization. 60% of the shares still owned by the Finch family, or the descendants of the founders. It's based in the fictional nation of Borland, a developed country. And so quite an interesting company for us to take a look at. So just a quick introduction into how we are going to look at this organization, how we are going to structure this video. We're going to look at the company using the rational model. So essentially we are going to look at where we ultimately want to be, what we want to achieve as an organization. We'll look at the various stakeholders that are important to our organization, how we can apply governance, how we can apply ethics, corporate social responsibility to it, ultimately to try and achieve that aim that the company wants. We'll then look at where we currently are, what is our situation like, what is the industry like, what is the greater environment like, what competitive forces are having an impact on the industry, and how is that going to affect how efficiently and how easily we'll be able to meet that overall objective. And then we'll look at how we're going to get there. So we know where we want to be, we know where we are, what are we going to do in the interim to ensure that we meet those objectives? How are we going to take where we are now and get to where we want to be? And as I've already mentioned, we'll start by looking at where we want to be. What direction are we heading in? Where do we want to ultimately be in the future? What is our mission? What are our objectives? How are we going to meet our stakeholders and shareholders' needs as we get towards that point? So the first thing we'll look at is the mission statement of the organization, or the logic and the rationale behind mission statements. And essentially, what they are all about is what does the company do? What does it exist for? What is it trying to achieve? And it's very important to have a good, effective mission statement, because it galvanizes everyone who works within the organization, everyone who is a stakeholder of the organization, to work towards an end goal. And you can see I've summarized that here by saying that a mission helps to provide a common purpose, a focus for the organization's strategy, and provide direction to the directors of the company when they are devising the objectives, setting the targets, when they are thinking strategically of where the organization should ultimately exist, or why the organization should ultimately exist. And the key model to look at when you are discussing mission statements is Campbell's mission statements. And that contains 4 key elements. And so we have the 4 key elements on the screen for you now. Have purpose. What is the company for? Why does it even exist? And of course, we know from the precedent the company ultimately exists to provide quality news to aid the local community. It specializes in local newspapers. It's not interested in national newspapers. It's not got international news sites. It is focused on helping the local communities, in engaging with the community, having a strong family, strong community ethos running through the organization to provide quality news for them. And so that is the purpose of existing, to aid the community, to help the local community. But how does it compete? What does it do differently to its competitors? That is answered in the second part of the mission statement. model, which is strategy. How are we going to compete? What range of businesses do we operate in? Now, of course, we operate in the print media or print news industry, but we also operate in the digital news industry. And because more and more people are getting their news online these days, even local news, it's more important than ever that we engage and invest more heavily in digital markets. And we compete, if you remember from the mission statement in the pre-scene, by providing high quality news. We're not interested in lowbrow news. We're not interested in kind of trashy tabloid material. We are about providing high quality, useful information. So that's, in a sense, how we are differentiating ourselves from perhaps some of the national newspapers, which are more broad in their focus, how we diversify the offering that we are giving. We are not trying to compete on being the cheapest, on being the most readily available. We are competing on being the best. Then we have the values. What does the company ultimately stand for? Does it stand for quality, value for money, innovation, etc.? And some of these are ones that do apply to us here at FNG. Of course, quality is very important. Ethics as well, particularly in this modern day and age where the rise of fake news on things like Facebook, etc. are causing problems. We have a strong commitment to researching and evidencing all of our stories. We want to have the highest quality journalists who provide the best quality material, the best quality stories, the most well-written stories, etc. And then finally we have policies. Our policies don't necessarily conform to part of the mission statement in the same way as the other three. They wouldn't necessarily be included in the mission statement, but these are ones that are more internal to the organization. This is how people who are working at the company, people who are stakeholders of the company, how they are expected to conform so that we are meeting that purpose, we are meeting that strategy, we are meeting those values. And if we take a quick look at the mission statement of the organization of FNG, we can see that many of those things, the purpose, the strategy, the values, are highlighted in the mission statement. Now, the first thing I would say, though, is that it is quite long. Perhaps it could be shortened. Usually a mission statement is just one sentence or so, just to summarize everything. But those purpose, values, and strategy are present. So our purpose is to serve the local communities. How we're going to compete is by being a multi-channel business that is trusted by our customers and works with them to provide a high value. And we are committed to providing first-class printing, freedom of expression, and right of an opinion to ensure that we provide news our readers can trust. So we can see those are present. We are existing to serve the local community by providing them with all the information they need. We are competing by operating across multiple channels to add value to our readers. We're not just giving them any old news, we're giving them news that is valuable. And what we ourselves value is everything being of high quality, first-class printing, freedom of expression, news that our local community can trust. So we can see that the mission statement here does cover those particular categories, although it could do with being shortened slightly because it is quite long as it is. But of course, there's no point in having an overall goal if you aren't measuring how effectively you are meeting those goals. And so, of course, rather than just to look at one particular point and then say this is where we need to be, and then to look in a few years' time to see if we've achieved there, it's more prudent and more pragmatic of an organization to look at how well they are continually going about achieving that. So as we want to grow as an organization, as we want to be adding value to our customers, as we want to provide value to our customers, etc., we need to look at the balanced scorecard as an ideal way of measuring how effectively we as an organization are working. The great thing about the balanced scorecard is it looks at a lot more than just finances. Of course, finances are very important because without profit, the company wouldn't exist. Without return on investment, we may find it hard to attract newer investors, private investors in the future, and we may need to do that given that we do have quite low profits at the moment and we do need to be investing quite heavily. So look at cash flow, so we can see how liquid we are as an organization, how effectively we can pay off all the short-term debts that we have, and also the gearing ratio to look at the overall debt running through the organization, which in turn affects how likely we are to get additional financing from banks, from additional debt funding providers, etc. Remember, the gearing rate was quite high, nearly 40% if you use the debt over equity method, but that's not as high as it has been in the past, and there are companies with lots higher debt than that. But remember that we will be looking to invest more heavily in the next few years because we really do need to drive forward this advancement into digital media. But of course, the Balanced Scorecard is not just about finances, so it's just as important to look at the other perspectives, which are the internal perspective, the learning perspective, and the customer perspective. Our internal is all about our internal processes, how efficient we are. We know that is a core part of the business, is trying to run as efficiently as possible, particularly in the print industry, because it still provides us with most of our revenue, but it is declining quite rapidly. A lot of the circulation of our print newspapers are declining quite rapidly, and therefore we need to try and cut costs as much as we can to harvest as much revenue as we can, which we can plug into the investment of digital media. So good ways of analyzing how well we are operating efficiently would be to look at employee utilization rates, how much downtime our employees have, because obviously they're being paid to do nothing in that sense. How effectively we are completing jobs on time, the success rate of them, how often they come under budget, but also because of the importance of staff to the organization, they mentioned repeatedly throughout the pre-scene, we need to make sure that they are satisfied, make sure that they are not looking to go elsewhere. We also remember that we have the Borland Journalist Union as well, or the Union of Journalists in the pre-scene, who are very aware of what's going on in all these different companies and will act, and have shown that they are willing to act, willing to step in if they feel there is a problem. So keeping our employees satisfied is also important from that perspective. And also our investment in technology and IT, which is obviously going to be very important as we try and improve our digital presence. And onto that, you can, as you would suggest, or as you would think, a lot of the key perspectives to look at under the learning and the innovation and growth perspective relate to digital media. So producing more apps. We don't produce apps for all our newspapers at the moment, although we do produce websites. Looking at the number of new projects completed, the number of new innovations, new marketing initiatives, new tech innovations as well. These are all incredibly important things that we need to look at. Now, we don't have to put a face to these yet, as in say exactly what this should be, what tech innovations should be, exactly what new marketing initiatives should be, because of course it's all very open-ended at the moment. The pre-scene is just a context. We don't have any absolute information necessary for the exam yet. We will be given that in the unseen, but we are speculating at the moment the kinds of things that we will need to be looking at. And just suggesting that you score the company based on some of these particular factors will also get you marks as well. And the examiner will appreciate that because it shows you are thinking strategically, you are thinking long term. And obviously customers as well. Without our customers, we wouldn't have a business. So it's very important to look at how many customers we have, whether that's the readership, whether that's the circulation, how many of these households or readers are regularly reading our papers. If they are using the digital versions, are they looking at it every day, and so on. And also another couple of ways to look at customer satisfaction would be either asking them about it, what kinds of things they would more like to see more of, etc., that would allow us to improve as an organization, and also the number of complaints, because obviously if people are complaining about our stories, they're complaining about how they're written, or complaining about faults and glitches in the app, that's obviously going to lead to a negative impression. So the next section relates to governance. I'll briefly give you an overview of the theory of governance before going on to the specific parts related to the case. So essentially, governance is the way in which organizations are directed, administered, and controlled with the aim of ensuring that the organization is run in a way that is right for all stakeholders. So essentially, ensuring that a business is run to benefit the stakeholders and society as a whole. So it sounds very good. And it's worth noting that this is only applicable to UK companies and listed companies at that, companies that trade on the stock exchange. But that's not to say that there aren't things that we can take from this and apply to any organization. It doesn't matter where that organization is based. Just as in our case, it's not based in the UK. And it doesn't even matter if the company isn't listed, because of course it's all about running the business in the best possible way. So just because you don't have to do it doesn't mean that you couldn't gain from it. Let's take a look at some of the few key factors from the Code of Governance. What is considered good governance? And that's having a separate chairman and CEO. Of course, the CEO is head of the organization, and the board is ahead of the CEO. And so the CEO runs the organization on behalf of the board, and then the chairman is the head of the board. So if you had a situation where the same person was the chairman and the CEO, they might be setting themselves targets they know they'll be able to achieve. So they're not pushing the company, trying to get the most out of the company, trying to achieve its potential. The chairman is just setting themselves easy targets that they know they'll be able to achieve so they can get their bonuses. Independent non-executive directors. These are people who are not employed by the organization. They sit on the board to, in a sense, act as the control for the executive directors, to ensure that the executive directors are running the organization in a way that is beneficial for stakeholders and not for themselves. This, of course, it goes some way to removing the issues caused with the agency problem. Now, agency problem is essentially where directors are running the organization on behalf of the shareholders. Now, the shareholders own the company, the directors don't, but the directors are in charge of the company. So the directors perhaps aren't necessarily interested in the long-term viability of the organization. They perhaps are more interested in their short-term gains. So they may leverage long-term sustainability, long-term growth for short successes, small successes, so that they can boost the share price of the organization, so that they can boost the dividends paid out to the shareholders and get their bonuses and move on. And so that's the point of the non-executive directors. Non-executive directors also need to be people who are skilled, knowledgeable, not just any old person. They need to know whether what the executive directors are doing is right or wrong, and they have to be firm as well. There's a tendency for independent NEDs to not rock the boat because they're paid quite a handsome stipend for doing it. It's only a few days a year job, and so a lot of them don't bother doing it, or don't bother sort of standing up, rocking the boat, where of course they have to. That is their job. And one of the main jobs for the NEDs is to sit on the Audit, Nomination and Remuneration Committees. Now, these are 3 different committees that, in a sense, are the essence of what governance is, ensuring that everything is done fairly and ethically. That's the Audit Committee, ensuring that executive directors are not using company funds to fund business trips and golf trips that the shareholders wouldn't approve of. For example, if an executive director is taking a client to Dubai for 2 weeks to discuss a business opportunity on the company's dime in a 5-star hotel, well, it could have just been a couple of hours meeting at the company's office. That would have been enough. Yet they chose to go on holiday for 2 weeks in a 5-star hotel. That's not an effective, efficient, correct use of company money, and that's the kind of thing that the Audit Committee is responsible for stopping. The Nomination Committee are in charge of selecting people to sit on the board, selecting the executive directors. And this to ensure that the chairman or the CEO doesn't simply bring their son or their daughter or their husband or their wife on board to the company to earn extra money for the family, to give them an opportunity. No, it needs to be someone who is right for the job, someone who is experienced, someone who has knowledge in the industry, and generally someone who is not related to other members of the board, because this of course affects their independence, this affects their ability to think, and perhaps increases the chance of them being biased. And remuneration committees as well. These are the committee, this is the committee responsible for deciding the pay on the directors. And this is because directors' pay and the list of directors has to be disclosed to the public, and so of course it's important to come across with to come out with a fair level of payment. If the company that you work for is not doing so well, it made X million in losses and it's got to lay off employees, but then it's also found out that the director had a £40 million bonus this year, which was a 20% increase on last year's, then people are going to think, well, why? Why is that director getting a bonus, a raise, when the company has done worse this year than it did last year? The company didn't meet any of its targets. It was supposed to be trying to break even this year, and it made millions in losses, yet you've given the director a bigger bonus than you even did last year. That's the kind of thing that will really frustrate the public, turn the public against the organisation, turn the shareholders against the organisation, turn the other stakeholders, such as the employees, against the organisation. And that is what governance tries to overcome. It's also worth pointing out that governance has a risk management focus, particularly with regards to the Audit Committee. So the Audit Committee is often in charge of creating things like risk registers and other things like that that ensure that risks are being dealt with. Because it's one thing to identify risks, it's another to actively go about mitigating the impact of those risks. And that's one of the values of corporate governance. Financial reporting and control, also very important, ensuring that all the statements are done as per the laws of the particular country in which the organisation operates in. Ensuring that directors have all the information they need, because of course they can't really be judged on their decision making if they aren't given the amount of information given. So this system is to ensure that all executive directors are provided with all the information that they need to facilitate good decision making. And with regards to decision making, that all directors are involved in it. And this means even if it means taking, something as simple as a show of hands, just ensuring that everyone is involved. Often, in certain situations, if you've got, say, founders of the company still sitting on the board, the founders are very powerful, everyone agrees with what the founder says. And that's against governance. The whole point of a board is that there is a consensus amongst a group of people rather than one person making all the decisions. So if that isn't happening, if one person or two people or half the board are far too powerful, then that goes against the point of a board and thus against the point of good corporate governance. And regular meetings with both institutional shareholders and all shareholders at the annual general meeting. Institutional shareholders, of course, being things like your pension schemes and your big stakeholders, big shareholders like that. And it's important that we do this because of the fact that they have a lot of money invested within the organisation. If they were to take their money out of the organisation, it could cause a lot of problems with the market because the share price might drop, as people may be thinking that there's something wrong with the organisation or it's on the decline because this major institutional shareholder has decided to take their money out of it. So that is governance from a theoretical perspective. So that's the theory out of the way. Let's look at how some of these things apply to FNG. So of course I've suggested in my previous videos, and I will suggest throughout this video as well, that perhaps there is the potential exam issue for an IPO. I'm not necessarily saying IPO is definitely what the company should be looking to do, but there is precedent for it. We were told that companies within Borland do this in this industry to raise initial finance. We know that debt is quite expensive at the moment. We've got high interest rates and there's not much money running through the organization, yet they do need to invest heavily. So it could be the only way of gaining the amount of money needed. But at present, there is less potential for the agency problem because, of course, the founders are still involved in the running of the organization. They're not likely to leverage the long-term sustainability of the company in favor of short-term profits. But they arguably have been doing that by claiming more in dividends than they actually made in profit. If they were to become a public company, they would need to make some changes in order to meet governance. At the moment, we only have 3 non-executive directors plus the chairperson, which of course is far less than half the board. Ideally, you would need about 6 non-executive directors to balance it out. And this is good for the company because we can bring in wider business experience, and they will also act as weights to check the board decisions. There's also no mention of remuneration nomination audit committees, which, as I mentioned on the previous slide, are very important. They are ways in which we can control the directors to ensure that they are operating in the best interests of the business. And particularly with audit committees, probably the most important of those here because it relates to risk. And risk, of course, being one of the big P3 topics, is very critical to your exam. And you will be expected to review the risks on any decision that you make, whether it's risks in a project, risks of environmental changes affecting the organization, or just risks of continuing to operate in a particular industry, and so on. And there's also no mention of the annual general meeting. Now, of course, we are not yet a public company, so it's not quite the same. We don't have to hold a general meeting for all our many different shareholders at the moment because we have one family that owns a lot of the shares. But there will be shares that are owned by people outside of the family, and therefore we still need to ensure that their needs are being met, that they are aware of what is going on in the organization, and that they are happy with what is going on in the organization. So at present, governance is not an enormous issue in this case compared with perhaps previous pre-scenes, but there are a few key governance things that would perhaps need to be looked at were they to undertake an IPO. And that's another way in which the examiner could link the topics together. The first question could be about IPOs, and then they would go on to governance. So it ties in with that, and that is how the structure of the exams does tend to work in the strategic case studies, that one of the questions does link from the other. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it, and more importantly, you have found it useful. I'd like to finish by just telling you a few things about the products that we produce here at Astranti and the ones that are part of our course. So these materials can all be purchased as part of the course or purchased individually. So we have our study text. We have 3 study texts for all the objective test exams. So 3 study texts for E1, P1, F2, F3, etc. But we also have the study text specifically for the case study exams, split into 2 parts. The first is about how to approach the exam, how to analyze the information, how to plan your answers, how to write your answers, and also the second part, which looks at the key theories from the objective test levels that are relevant to the particular case study. So if you are looking at P2, F2, E2 for the management exam, F3, P3, E3 for the strategic case study exam, and so on. We have our course videos, which look at how to plan your answers, how to manage your time effectively. These are the key reasons why people fail the exam. We have our pre-scene analysis, which looks at the pre-scene in a lot of depth, applies key information to that, and also concludes with the strategic analysis, where we look at the various different models in the CIMA syllabus and apply them to the case, and also the top 10 most likely issues to arise in your exam. Generally, we have a 70 to 80% accuracy rate on our top 10 issues. our industry pack, which details in great depth the history and the current contemporary issues within the particular industry that the pre-scene is based on. We also have 20 to 25 industry examples that you can use within your answers. We have mock exams that can be purchased with or without marking and feedback, where you can get some real exam practice in, look for the kinds of things that the examiner is going to bring up in the exam, and also get marking and feedback from expert markers who have marked for CIMA and for us for many years, who know exactly the kinds of things that the examiner is looking for, exactly the kinds of mistakes that students often make, and can provide lots of detailed feedback to ensure that you improve on your performance. We also have our master classes, which are 2 day-long classes which look at all the key issues facing students in the exam. We will also go through live planning, showing you how to plan your answers effectively, how to write your answers effectively. Again, key things that cause people to fail the strategic case study exam, or any of the case study exams for that matter. And also, if you do sign up for our course, provided that you have filled out your forms, provided that you have submitted your mocks, provided you have done everything to show that you have really given it your all to try and pass this exam, we also offer a pass guarantee, giving a free resit to anyone who fails the exam.